harvested, but they could have gone fresh but went to processing, or we had some that didn't make export quality. And in October, we revised our forecast to 125 million pounds. So question is how much did we produce this year? Don't know. We are not done collecting assessments. Now, assessments are due October 30th. So if you've not paid your assessments, and I'm looking at some people around here, you're late. And if you don't pay by November 30th, you can get a 10% penalty. Now, we've collected on about 70 million pounds so far. And I'm about ready to hit a slide to show you the list of people who have not paid. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that. But I have a list, and we're making phone calls. And but I still think we're going to get 125 million pounds. Last year we had 116, so I still think that we're going to be up. I wished I had as easy of a job as Henry Bierlink does. He can go to the coffee shop and see all of his growers, and they all pay on time. It is not like that in the blueberry industry. We have much ornerier growers. Now, if you look at the history of production, and I'm picking 2006, kind of, it's an arbitrary point, but that's when I started running the Blueberry Commission. And if you look in 2006, Michigan was the big producer, 88 million. Then there was BC and New Jersey. Those three were the big players. But if you look over, now these are unofficial numbers, but look at that. Michigan in 17 did the same as they did in 2006. They were down. BC was up. Oregon was up a lot. Now, the last 4 years, Washington was the leading producer of blueberries in the United States. Right now, the forecast is, and we did not collude on this. This is an independent assessment. We came up with 125 million pounds apiece. Now, it probably will not end up exactly 125, but we will know shortly. Georgia can produce over 100 million pounds, but they keep having frost events. How do you go from 96 down to 26? Well, Georgia showed us how, and they were down to 50. It's a real wild card, but Georgia can be 50 this year, 26 last year, and they can do 100 and 125 next year. New Jersey has been a downward trend, but in the last couple of years been flat. North Carolina had some frost events. California's been flat. I will tell you, California next year could do 70 million plus pounds, Florida, Mexico. But if you look at this, there's been a gradual increase, a significant dip last year, but 751 is still the most blueberries that have been produced in North America. Now, 60% of production is along the West Coast, and this percentage is going to increase. Increasingly, the blueberry industry is a West Coast thing. Now, if you look at the split between fresh and processed, I want to point out that for processed, 90 million was a high watermark in 2016. We dipped a little bit last year, and our forecast this year is for 2018 is 40 fresh, 85 processed. So we're heavily processed state, although our fresh part is increasing. And the thing that is quite remarkable is, this is an estimate, but of this 40 million pounds, 30 of it's organic, 10 of it is conventional. There's no place where most fresh production is organic any place in the world. Washington and BC each processed 85 million pounds of blueberries. BC, Oregon, and Washington account for almost all of the processing in the United States. If you think the future of blueberries is a West Coast thing, the future of processed blueberries is a Northwest thing. And so BC, Oregon, and Washington are responsible for the lion's share of processed blueberries. I just want to point out a 3-year trend. Here, look at, this has been relatively flat for high bush production, but if you look at low bush, 409, 295, 210. John Shelford is going to take a deep dive into some of these numbers and talk about what this means. But if you look at processed, there's been a 3-year downward trend in production of processed. in large part due to the low bush. Now, there were some quite low prices in 2016. 2017 wasn't better, but because of the low price, you're seeing a lot of machine harvest of fresh blueberries, a striking amount, and nowhere was there more of that in BC. In 2017, BC increased their fresh pack in a single year by 50%. So what did they do in 2018? This is a 5-year trend. 60 million. They went from 50 million to 75. That's quite a striking number. They were 70, so they went down a little bit, but that's still a lot of fresh. But again, 85 million. That's still down from 2015 and 2016. So what are we going to do next year? It is foolish to guess, but I do. Now, assuming minimal winter injury, assuming normal pollination, assuming no drought, assuming no excessive high temperatures, and if we did 125 million in 2018, and I think we could, with no problem, increase our production by 12%, which would be 140 million pounds. But with some degree of confidence, I can tell you it's going to be between 130 and 150. That's the sideboards. I mean, the future is increased production. I'll just point out, Whatcom County is the leading producer of blueberries. There's over 7,000 acres. There's record acreage, record production out of this state, out of this county, and I'm guessing 15% of that's not yet fully bearing. 20% of Eastern Washington is not yet fully bearing, and there's some pretty high yields over there, even in the organic fields. As I already kind of tipped my hand, Washington's a leading producer of organic blueberries, and this is the fastest growing segment. I mean, we had someone that put in 700-800 acres in the last 12 months, and they're not done planting. That's all slated for organic production and all for organic processing. I've never really seen somebody do a significant planting, and it's not a huge planting of blueberries, but I've never heard of someone doing a significant planting of blueberries specifically targeting organic processed market. But I also tell you that there's no market a Washington grower cannot screw up. I would tell you, conventional production is growing as well. Snohomish, Skagit counties are leading in new acres, followed by Whatcom, Franklin, Lewis, and Benton County. And but the planting has moderated, and as far as I know, there's at least 500, as much as 1,000 acres slated to go in. Now I know there's a 1,000-acre planting that was slated to go in. They just pulled the plug on that decision. So the planting is moderated, but it's still going on at a pretty significant pace. And so our production is going to increase from years to come. I want to point out in Eastern Washington, we only have about 30 growers, but it represents 43% of the production. And most of this 43% of production comes from 6 farms. In Western Washington, it represents 57% of production. Now, this is based on 2017 numbers because we don't have 2018 numbers. And we have roughly 200 growers in Eastern Washington, and 60% of Washington blueberry growers are in Whatcom County. This is a dangerous game I'm playing up here, but this is projected plantings. I do the best I can. I just talk to people and try and come up with acreage by location. And there we go. I got us at 6,050 acres Eastern Washington, 7,300 in Whatcom, 3,100 in Skagit, 850 Lewis, 1,500 Snohomish, 1,500 other, come up with 20,300. Now, earlier I told you in Eastern Washington that they get 20 to 25,000 pounds an acre. But in my calculations, I put it 15 because it seems like you never quite make what you think you're going to make. but most people are doing more than 15,000. But if I put in 20 or 25,000, this number becomes so big that we just can't handle looking at a number that big. But I have it, if we stop planting in 2019, nothing comes out, and these plants all go to maturity, we could have a 230 million pound market. So if we do 125 this year, we're not close to leveling out. Now, I don't know if this is going to happen. There's a lot of assumptions here, but these are fairly decent numbers. And these are fairly decent numbers. And all the rest of this is just calculations, multiplications by these two numbers. So it suggests we can go to 230 million pounds. And by the way, they're planting in Oregon like they're planting in Washington. I just want to point out that our assessments are 4 cents a pound. We're not like the raspberry folks. They're up to a penny a pound. They're 2.5 times as high as we are. So what a good deal you're getting on and for blueberries. I only say that because Henry is in the room. And I just want to point out this orange line is our budgeted. If you look at that 600,000, if somebody says, yeah, if you have 125 million, you get 4.10 cents a pound, how do you get 600,000? That includes some carryover funds that we didn't spend the year before, because we always operate in the black. I just want to point out, this is our overall budget. This line is research. Blue is exports. So you'll hear us talk about exports a little bit later. That's a big push for us lately. This is administrative expenses. I just want to point out that how relatively flat the rate of growth for administrative expenses are, and this is outreach. I just want to point out that our administrative costs are budgeted next year to decline from 19% to 16%, and that the rate of growth since 2006 has been less than half the rate of assessment growth. So our total administrative costs are 87,000 on a budget of about 600,000. The Blueberry Commission does not do a lot of promotions because the U.S. High Bush Council has got the money to do this, and that's their responsibility to do marketing. And we had a presentation from Victoria DeBrun about all of the work that they're doing. I mean, they've got a $9 million budget, and we've got a $600,000 budget. So what we have done is we've done a small, fresh, in-season, in-state effort to try and expand people to buy from farmers market, U-Pick, some of the smaller growers. We switched our marketing companies. When I started in 2006, we were working with Delani Communications, and we work with them every year, and there was a decision to bid that out. They'd had it for time immemorial. We switched to a company called Avado, and it's a $30,000 budget. I asked them to give me some slides, so I've got some professional, cool-looking slides instead of my usual ones here. So this is Avado PR. They're a Bellevue company, and they did a lot of social media, bloggers. These are, I didn't even know what some of these magazines are, but they got articles into these magazines, articles in the Produce News. They redid our website. And if you want to, you can do searches on blueberries, and they did this search optimization thing to, if you search on where can I get blueberries, tells you where all of the U-Picks are, all of the farmers market that does blueberries. And so we classed up our website. They did this partnership with Cupcake Royale. I guess cupcakes are a big fashion theme or something. And so there's a fancy cupcake chain that's in Western Washington, and they did this Washington blueberry lemonade cupcake, and apparently it was quite popular. And so they sold Washington blueberry lemonade cupcakes to 300,000 people. And they did Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, and all the kind of stuff that I don't know how to do. And so they, 790,000 impressions through June through September of things that they pushed out. And so we're real happy with that move to the new outfit. But if you look back at, or think back to the graph, the biggest line was research. The Blueberry Commission was founded with the objective to deal with some serious problems in the industry. Mummyberry was killing the industry. And so one of the impetuses for forming, or the primary one, was to fund research, and the commission has largely been a research funding commission ever since. About half our funds go for research. We have a research committee it's by far the most active committee in that the commission has. It sets priorities, puts out an RFP, makes recommendations for the full commission. And if you look, when I started in 2006, we funded 4 projects at 17,000. Last year we're at 241,000. Also, I want to point out, it just seems like every year the average cost of a project seems to be climbing up. The cost of research is increasing. Part of that is the lack of state support at Washington State University. And so they are shifting more of their costs onto the commissions because they're not getting enough state support. And so it just costs more to do research. I want to point out that Leighton Overson is the chair of the research committee, and I couldn't be happier with his work there. This is a list of the projects that we funded. The researchers, you see my name is quite prominent on there. And here is the dollar figures, but cold hardiness in Washington blueberries, organic control of SWD, Tim Miller's herbicide program. You can look at SWD research. Boy, this one here, RNAI. That's one of the 2 projects that we fund that's really kind of like over the horizon. This RNAI is almost like a science fiction thing. They can make a product that's regulated as a pesticide, but has no environmental risk, no human risk, and it's 100% lethal to SWD. And it is so sophisticated and complicated, I cannot explain what it is. But it's an interesting project. The first RNAI pesticides were just registered for corn, and we're trying to get it for blueberries and raspberries. And Henry and I submitted a special crop block grant to try and get a bunch of money to help this guy from USDA. So anyway, we have a lot of good research programs, and I think projects, and I think this is a strong suit for the commission. But the concern I have is who's going to do our work for us going forward. If we're primarily a research funding commission, we need to have researchers, and there's a soil position that's not filled, the small fruit entomologist is not filled, the weed science position is coming open. We're probably not going to have a plant pathologist soon, and there's no plans to fill any of those positions. And we're trying to figure out what to do, who's going to do our research in the future. The other big area that we're working with is exports. We're facing an oversupply situation. I pointed at 230 million pound, and if Oregon is planting at the rate of Washington and they've got 230, and I don't think they're done planting in BC, there's going to be a lot of blueberries, and we're going to try and export our way out of this. And Washington is very export oriented. Oregon's got access to South Korea, and of course we want the same. And so we have developed an aggressive export market area. And so to try and develop export markets is difficult. We're going to have a whole presentation on this. But I'll tell you, Washington has teamed up with an effort with California and now Oregon. We're trying to get into South Korea, Vietnam, Philippines, China, a number of places early. And try and push that along. This is we've hired Bryant Christie to make to help us with that. And the president, or I don't know what's Alicia, what's Bill's? Is he president, or what's his position? Chairman? Okay, he's chairman of Bryant Christie International. That's a trade firm that we're using. It's going to actually give a talk at 11 o'clock that y'all want to be at. But we put money into this for several years, and we actually are going to gain access to Philippines in, I said this year, but I mean in 2019. We think we're going to get access to Vietnam in 2020. We hope after that we're going to be into South Korea for fresh. And anyway, this area is our biggest area of our increased efforts. It's one of our, Brian Sakuma, our chair, has made this a top priority. And in 2018, we hosted the Vietnamese trade team. Oregon hosted the Filipino trade team. And that was a key thing to get them, that visit over here was key to get them to open up their markets. We landed, I wrote a $160,000 specialty crop block grant that we got funded, which goes to Bryant Christie, and we're working on an effort to lower the tariffs into India. We've got access into India, but it's a 44% tariff, which is a significant barrier. There's a process for getting that lowered. Cranberries and some nut crops have got the tariffs lowered. We're going to try and do the same. We're planning a joint marketing effort with Oregon to go over and market blueberries in the Philippines when it opens up. We're planning a trade mission to Malaysia and Singapore. We have access to those countries, but we have not done any work to try and promote our berries into those countries. Skagit County's got a trade mission going to South Korea. We're going to put Brian Sakuma on that one to try and push processed blueberries. Food Safety Modernization Act. I'll tell you, food safety is going to be a kind of a challenge for us. If you're a small grower, it's going to be a challenge. We're trying to offer training to get people certified. You have to have this pretty extensive 8-hour training with some very specific requirements, and one person from every farm has to have this in 2018, and they're going to do enforcements on this in 2019. We have some other issues, paid sick leave. So food safety and labor continue to be issues. The other thing I want to mention is we host this small fruit conference, and I'm very proud to be involved with getting this off the ground. I'm safely over in the east side, so I don't have to do hardly any of the work for it, just write checks. But it's a real success story. Chris Benedict, Diane O'Neill, others, Henry Beerlink, have put a lot of work into this, and I want to thank them for the work they put into this. And I told you that I would be done at 8:30 no matter what time I started, and I'm close. I am not going to take any questions because most of you guys have the opportunity to talk to me. Chris, do you want to tee up the next slide, the next talk? So I'm going to go straight. And the other thing is unfortunately, and this really is unfortunate, that I have to leave at 10:45. So if you want to talk, yeah. No, it's Alicia. So I have to leave at 10:45. I want to mention our next speaker is Alicia Adler. Alicia came up here from Sacramento, California to give us a talk. And she is, for 3 years, has been export program manager for the U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council. Before that, she worked for 6 years with Bryant Christie, where she oversaw their international marketing program. And we wanted her to give a presentation about the efforts that the blueberry industry has done in trying to develop export markets. And when you see, I assume you're going to do market access as well as market promotions? Okay, and so when you see what they're doing, it's a pretty impressive operation. So come on up, Alicia.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks for inviting me up. Normally my presentations are to the USHBC board or some of their committees, so being able to come out and meet the state groups or the regional groups is really important in spreading our message and letting you know what we're working on. So I'm going to give a very abbreviated form of this presentation. I'm going to stick to my 20 minutes and allow time for questions because I'm sure you have them about what our priorities are. All of our work is on behalf of the U.S. industry. So we have a big challenge in front of us in addressing issues that face all of the different growing regions. There's a lot of different pests around the world that affect the U.S. industry, and we have to, and then, you know, as well as export markets that different areas, different growing regions target. So we really try to have a good representation on our committees. So we have representatives from all the areas and they export both fresh, frozen, processed. They have contacts throughout the world, and they really feed us the intelligence that direct our efforts. So this is a very high level synopsis of our work, but what I hope it does is kind of share how we approach our programming. So you may be familiar with the USHBC strategic planning process. We do a strategic plan every 5 years. Our current plan is we are in the middle of it through 2022. Part of what we went through a few years ago was we actually established an export subcommittee, which is underneath the promotion committee, the USHBC promotion committee, which oversees all of our marketing budgets. But the export subcommittee, we invited exporters from key exporting regions. So there's good representation from the Pacific Northwest. That's really been key. And they sit on our committee and really tell us what their priorities are and what their concerns are. So through that export subcommittee, we narrowed down our focus. So all of our activities aim to promote U.S. high-bush blueberries in targeted regions and countries. First and foremost, the council exists to promote blueberries. So all of our activities have to be promoting them overseas. Conduct research and provide industry resources. So that this research is both federally, state, and industry funded research, and then providing industry resources through, and that means sharing the information with you and making sure we share it with you in a usable way. Opening new markets. This gets a little tricky. The U.S. High Bush Blueberry Council, because it's a checkoff program, we can't have any political action. So the North American Blueberry Council is really key in opening the markets. Any request we have, the industry has to go through the NABC. However, the USHBC is the branch that provides the research and the supporting information that helps justify why we should open new markets and why the U.S. is a viable supplier, and all of our pest management systems, if that's a concern in opening the market. So we play a really key role in that, but the NABC is the organization that really opens them. And then leveraging external funds where available to promote high bush blueberries. This has been a key and something I've been really charged with since I came on, is pursuing federal grant funds through the Foreign Agricultural Service. So we have, I'll share with you our budget, but it's more than doubled. By next year, we will have more than doubled our export budget, and largely due to grant funds. And I'll share with you all the different programs we're participating in. A lot of them are acronyms, and probably you'll forget it the minute I stop talking, but they've been really key, and FAS's support over the past few years has been really important. So now I kind of want to talk about just some of the highlights that we've been working on as a committee. When the committee was formed a few years ago, we really wanted to have a better understanding about all the markets that the industry pursues, how we are allocating our resources and why, and where are the challenges, where do growers get stopped, and what challenges do they have, and then how are we allocating our resources in the best way. So we conducted a global market assessment, which was really a collection of data across all areas: export data, import data in export countries. We looked at all the regulatory issues, MRL challenges and hiccups that we face along the way, tariffs. And then we also looked at consumer trends and where is consumption growing and most quickly. So we consolidated all of this data. Bryant Christie helped us. They have a really good research department. And it was done over the summer. The topics included market access issues, competition, product distribution characteristics, and consumer preferences, among others. So all this information, which some of you have seen. It's hundreds of pages. So what we're doing is making a database through our website. It'll be launched. I'll kind of go show you a slide about it, but it'll be launched in January, and all this information will be online. Every grower will have access to it, and it's all this information by export market, consolidated and easy to use, hopefully, but give feedback if it's not. But that's something that we're really proud of this year, and has driven not only in developing the database, but driven our program planning. So now I want to show you a few slides, which really summarizes what the data showed us. This is total U.S. high bush blueberry exports. This is from the USDA Global Agricultural Trade System. I pulled the codes for fresh high bush, frozen high bush, and dried high bush. There's a lot of other codes out there, which makes it really difficult to track exports very precisely, but these are the numbers that we feel best capture those three categories of blueberry products exported. You'll see fresh and frozen. Fresh about 5 years ago was a little higher than frozen. Over the past few years, it's pretty evened out, where we export about 14,000 tons of frozen and fresh, and dried has been pretty steady around 2,000 tons. One exercise we did, the committee meets throughout the year. One exercise we did is I wanted to do a little math, and that's why Alan and I get along well. We like math and looking at the numbers, and sometimes they're a little scary. One of his slides that I just saw was a little scary, but we looked at total production that's projected U.S. wide over the next 5 years. I looked at historic exports. I looked at historic shipments to Canada, and those are shipments that stay in Canada. So I wanted to see what volume actually stays in the U.S. market and consider that domestic consumption. I looked at numbers that go to Canada and stay in Canada, and that's been pretty steady over the past 5 years. Then I looked at, what people tell me about production coming. I talked to the different growing regions and what they know, and I kind of put a number together and asked a few people. I said, just kind of wink and nod if I'm on the right track, and no one really said you're wrong, Alicia, and I was bummed. But there's a lot of blueberries coming on. And then I looked at our goals for domestic consumption, and I said, okay, if we meet our goals for domestic consumption, what will that look like? If Canadian consumption, as it has stayed in the past 5 years, pretty stable, what will that look like? And then, so where are all these blueberries gonna go? And I said that because that's what I have to work on. That's my challenge. That's my directive, is find homes for these blueberries. So in the end, we export about 5% to markets outside of North America. And in order to find a home for all these blueberries coming in the next 5 years, we have to increase that from 5% to 10%. And what that means in terms of volume is that we need to increase our exports to offshore countries in Asia by 150% volume-wise. And broken down at a company level, I said that's a huge challenge for this industry. And when I meet with companies individually and trying to learn more about what their challenges are, they said it's really hard to deal with this stuff. And if you're not equipped with the right resources and information, let's look at my time, it's going to be a challenge, Alicia. So that's always in the back of my mind, and I want to spread the word that the U.S. has been we've enjoyed the largest blueberry market in the world. Every other growing region exists to export. Their mindset is export, and we need to start changing that mindset as we move forward. And a lot of what you'll see that we're working on is to help you tackle these markets and provide resources, as well as promoting, of course, but making sure that you know what's going on and have the resources to address problems as they come up. At a fresh level, I'll break it down by a product category, but the UK, you can kind of see up and down, but these are the countries that we've been exporting to: Japan, Hong Kong, Taiwan, Mexico, Singapore, Korea. I've kind of picked the markets that we're pretty active in, but about evens out between 100 and 300 metric tons annually to each market. let's see, Japan and Korea are our largest markets. You know, in Korea, the free trade agreement, the tariff on frozen exports is 0 this year, and we've seen a little bit of a jump, but you know, still a challenging market. And Japan has been on a slow decline, but around between 2,500 and 2,000 tons. Other countries that we are active in: Australia, China, Mexico, Taiwan, UK, all under 1,000 tons a year. So another kind of a bright spot looking at export markets, we wanted to look at per capita consumption, and I had to use fresh high bush blueberries. I really wanted to look at all the different categories, but based on the research and data, it was really hard to break down those categories by frozen, dried, processed versus retail. So we looked at fresh. Just want to make that disclaimer, and this is from 2016. But you'll see that North American fresh blueberry consumption about 31 ounces per person per year, followed by UK, EU. So really the developed countries eat the most blueberries in the world. We all know that. But then I wanted to look at where the highest growth now is around the world. And the bottom countries, which I've circled in red: Taiwan, Japan. We've been active in Japan for a long time. Malaysia, Russia, China, South Africa, Colombia, Israel. These are all countries that we are either promoting in or we're pursuing grant funds for market research in. And the consumption is very low. To compare, the population of the US is about 325 million. And the population of these countries here collectively is about 618 million people you're targeting. So twice the population of the US. Now the percentage of people that can afford blueberries is a lot lower, but even just increasing them from a half an ounce a year to maybe an ounce, that would be enough to solve our export dilemma and increase exports. So we saw this as an opportunity. Now, with every opportunity comes a challenge. We also looked at tariff rates. The green highlighted countries are those that we are active in or we are working on in terms of policy work. The circled countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, Japan, Philippines, Taiwan, about 5 to 7% tariff. Which, you know, compared to other growing regions, they have 0 tariffs. So it's a big competitive advantage they have, as well as the value of the dollar has been pretty high compared to other currencies. And one thing to keep in mind, it hasn't happened yet, but when the US left the Trans-Pacific Partnership, these countries formed a new TPP. I think it's a Comprehensive and Progressive Free Trade Agreement, and they've banded together. They signed it in March. It hasn't been ratified, so it isn't in effect, but it would grant duty-free access for all these countries for fresh, dried, and frozen blueberries. So, and a lot of these, you know, Chile's involved, Peru's involved. So you're going to have these competition in these areas that we're targeting with 0 tariffs. So that's something we're keeping an eye on and working on. But you know, we don't see the U.S. getting back into this free trade agreement, at least during this administration. Here's a plug for this database. It's through ushbc.org, which has just had a new facelift thanks to Vicky's work. And we'll have a database login. You'll have to request a login. We want to make sure our access is exclusive for US growers. But if you are a USHBC member, we will grant you access to it. That'll be launched in January 2019. Any feedback, any problems, please let us know. We'll make it easy for you to provide that. I want to make sure it's your go-to guide for exports and answer any questions. This will not replace the MRL database, which I'm sure you all use very, very regularly, but we will have extra MRL data and information provided you through it. I know I'm running low on time. I'm just going to kind of go through these a few more slides quickly. But our budget in 2018 was $1,467,494. That gets very specific because our grant dollars are very specific down to the dollar. But we get technical grants. We get about 350 to 500,000 annually to address technical barriers. For 2019, a big grant that we're working on, which we're still putting together, but it'll help us address the MRL issues in Korea. As you know, they're transitioning to a positive MRL list in January, but they've granted a 3-year extension to allow us to establish new limits. So the federal government will be giving money for us to do trials and industry input has been key on that, and knowing what are the real priorities. So that grant will be funding that over the next few years. Quality Samples Program, we're able to ship frozen, dried blueberries for use in goods and new product development. So we're working on that in emerging markets. Emerging markets helps determine the feasibility of these markets. We use that mostly for processed and frozen industries. Market Access Program, this funds all of our promotional efforts. We do a lot of retail partnerships and as well as with importers and their distributors to provide support during peak seasons, and that kind of adds a little value when maybe we're getting edged out in the early season or the late season by competitors. We can offer promotional support to keep U.S. blueberries on the shelves. And the industry matching contribution is about $500,000 annually, and that is a requirement for these grants, but and that supplements all of our work across these areas. I have a slide on export promotion activities, but in Japan, I list the retailers. Costco is a huge partner for us increasingly in Asia, especially Japan and Korea. It's been a really good relationship so far that we've developed. And then we also work with the big department store chains overseas and the local domestic retailers in country. Social media and retail promotions in Southeast Asia. This is a country and region where we're really starting to get started on and really raise awareness of U.S. blueberries and get in with the retail groups there. Taiwan we also do work in Taiwan, and then we have market access activities. The Philippines and Vietnam. Alan's talked about that, but it's been a really comprehensive effort in opening up these countries for fresh blueberries and addressing these barriers. So Philippines, Vietnam, we've also done work with China, working on South Africa, and helping work on issues to make Korea not only open it for the rest of the country, but making it an easier market for the Oregon growers who already have access. In 2019, our unified export strategy that we put together drives consumer demand in export markets, working to raise consumption, just that half an ounce per year, if we could just get to an ounce, and support market access initiatives, both through research and MRL information too, and provide actionable research and information to the industry. So these are our three main driving goals. For 2019, our total budget, if funded as requested, would be $1,615,790. And there's a new program, the Agricultural Trade Promotion Program. Running out of time here. This was part of the aid package from the Trump administration to help alleviate some of the burdens that have been brought on by the retaliatory tariffs. So the blueberry industry did put in a request. I'm anticipating about 200,000. No one really knows what they're going to get. We'll find out in January, or I think by the end of December, and then the funds would be available in January. But we did put in a request for that to alleviate some of the trade disruptions that have been caused by the retaliatory tariffs. We requested EMP funds to explore new markets for processed goods, quality samples, again, frozen and dried, promoting frozen and dried blueberries. Technical assistance will work on the blueberry maggot research and SWD, as well as establishing MRLs for the Korean market. And our contribution would go towards supplementing these efforts. And last slide, this is how we measure our progress. I wanted to let you know. We track US market share in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, among other countries too, but these are top areas where we want to keep an eye on them. Our share of US production exported, this kind of goes into that math problem that I was talking about. We look at our USDA FAS trade program funding and how are we selling our work to FAS and justifying the need for more funds. And then we do regular U.S. blueberry acceptance and preference work overseas. We survey consumers regularly, and all this information will be available through the database as well. So you can kind of keep an eye on our report card. You'll have access to it on your own time. And that's it. I want to let you know it's not just it's not just me working on these issues. We have a whole team. We work with Bryant Christie very closely on the chemical and MRL side. We work with Tom Payne. I'm sure he's been around for a long time. A lot of you work with him. He's the one that's really opening markets for processed blueberries in emerging markets and the U.S. market too. And then we have agencies in country that work on your behalf and work with your customers. So be aware they're there, they're a resource for you year round. That's all I have. Any questions? Is that 20 minutes, 25 minutes, Alan? Am I in trouble?
See you, Daryl. Well, you missed my talk, Daryl. All right, so we're gonna take not a break, but it's time for us to do something a little different. We've got a lot of people in this industry that help out a lot, and to recognize folks, we came up with the Industry Service Award, and we're gonna give out this award. It was Henry and I came up with the idea that we needed to recognize people that help out in the industry, and we decided we're going to do it the same way, in that somebody got picked for it, and then that person or the recipient of the award will pick the subsequent awards. Last year it was Brian Sakuma that got it, and he didn't know he was going to get it, and he was sick and didn't show up, and so I wasn't able to give it to him in front of everybody. And then I was going to kind of redo it this year, and he forgot and scheduled an international trip to Japan, so he's not here, but he did select this year's recipient of the Washington Blueberry Industry Service Award. But he's not here, and so I have to do this on his behalf. But he picked it, the person, and I was kind of with him in his thinking of the selection process, and I couldn't have been happier with the way that this went. I'm going to just describe some of this person's career path and a few things about this individual. Who doesn't know that this person doesn't know that they're getting it. But the individual graduated from the Nooksack High School in 1970, which rules out just about everybody in here. He got an undergraduate degree in 1974 at Washington State University and roomed at WSU with Marv Infield. And a comment that I got from Marv Infield was the only way that he made it through school was because of his roommate, because Marv always wanted to do other things, but Brian said we needed to study. He went on to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, got a master's degree, and something that is pretty interesting, after that, he went to Washington, D.C. and worked for an environmental protection agency, something that I also did out of graduate school, but I lasted longer than he did. But like me, he came to Washington State, and around 79 or 1980, he started as a fieldman with Wolfkill Fertilizer in Linden. Brian Chesler started at the Whatcom Farmers Co-op in 1982 as a fieldman. He went to work for Tri-Fruit as a production manager, crop advisor, ran the receiving station for Milne Fruit while he's working for Mayberry Pack and Kurt Mayberry Farm and Infield's Farm. And so he was the fieldman, production manager for 3 large berry growing companies. He went back to the co-op as a fieldman, then came back and worked at Infield Farms and Kurt Mayberry Farms. He retired in 2015, and in a stunning, questionable activity, he moved to the Tri-Cities for retirement, but he moved there with his wife Sandy to be close to his son Matt and daughter-in-law and their 2 granddaughters, but he still could not stop working, and he is has been consulting over there and teaching us on the east side how to grow blueberries. I want to point out that during this career path, it's somewhat, to me, somewhat extraordinary as a fieldman for him to have the outsized role and impact that he had on the berry industry. He made many trips back to Washington, D.C. He was one of the point people in the effort to generate the funds to start the Small Fruit Research Center. He negotiated with Senator Mark Hatfield and got $3 million to start, or he was part of the process, but one of the point people that got the $3 million that started the Small Fruit Research Center. He was the Washington blueberry rep to the Small Fruit Research Center for years. He was the head of the Washington Blueberry Commission's Research Committee for years. He was the Washington Berry representative on the Washington State Commission on pesticide registration. And he, for me, when I got involved in the Blueberry Commission, was the single most knowledgeable person that I knew of when it came to berries. Henry Bierlink has a similar opinion. He kind of feels that, you know, it's not just he's getting a blueberry industry service award, but his service was in blueberries and raspberries. And Henry described him with the same words I did, was he was my go-to guy. And someone else described him as he set the high water mark on what it means to be a fieldman, and that mark has not been surpassed. And when I ask other people what they comment to say something about him, it was almost always the same thing, and that was just, he was just a fantastic guy. He's just a good guy, and I don't know why they're putting it all in past tense, but anyway, it was just uniformly received as this is the right person for this. So Brian, come up here and I want to give you an award. I got someone to
Well, thank you. I'm almost speechless, very surprised and appreciative. And I know the years went by in blink of an eye. I had a ball. All I'd say about my college days with Marv is some of the stuff we used to do, people get arrested for now.
I couldn't be happier with this. The other interesting thing I didn't put in there, but now I just can't keep from saying it, is why is it when I was saying, give me stories from the old days, they all seem to go back to pop machines at WSU? Was that what you were referring to about you'd get arrested for today? Yes? Okay. All right. Anyway, that's, anyway, that made me happy. All right. We got one more speaker in the blueberry session. I just want to see how we're very close to being right on time. So our next speaker came all the way to talk to us for 30 minutes from Naples, Florida. This gentleman has been in the blueberry business for 42 years. From roughly 1976 to 1994, he was with Michigan Blueberry Growers, or MBG Marketing. From 95 till 2013, he was with Nature Ripe. From 2002 to 2013, he was the CEO for Nature Ripe. And currently, he's, I don't know if it's semi-retired or exactly how you describe it, but he's a strategic advisor to Nature Ripe's Foods. That's their process division. And I see John Shelford at least twice a year, at the USHBC NABC meetings, where he is a fixture and a bit of an institution to me. And I think of him as when it comes to stats, particularly in processed blueberries, this is the single most knowledgeable individual in the world. And you're going to see from the numbers that he presents why I think this. I think this gentleman has got the single best grasp on processed blueberries of anybody I know. And we're having there's some big numbers. You saw the number I had up on the screen yesterday, and he was talking at the most recent U.S. High Bush Council meeting, and the meeting wasn't over. The meeting that we were in were not even over, and I pulled him out of the room, and I said, you've got to come to Washington and share with us what you know about the kind of things he was just talking about. And listen carefully, because there's going to be some very interesting information, and it's the kind of information that we need to know in order to plan for the future. So John, come on up.
Thank you, Alan, and it's good to be back again. I know many of you folks seen you in the industry. Glenn Aldridge come up today. I don't know when the last time I saw Glenn was, but good to see you. Strategic advisor, actually, I'm having a ball now. I've been in the industry 42 years, and the last 5 have been fun because I have no more board of directors to report to. I have no more employees to hire, fire, and give appraisals to. And I do what I love best, and that's basically do sales and keep a lot of stats. And they still hang around, and they still send me a paycheck once in a while. And so it really has been fun. But the industry is going through tremendous changes. There's no question about that. I'll just comment. I didn't put my slide that I had, I think 2 years ago here at this meeting with a forecast. But I went back in my numbers that I use and I basically just do linear forecasting. I just put growth rates on because based upon what the acreages are. But when Alan put up there 230 million pounds in Washington State in 2025, I looked at my numbers. The numbers that I have from a linear forecast that will be in some of the numbers I use, I have 245 million pounds in 2025 for Washington and Oregon combined. So that just tells you if Washington and Oregon grow parallel, I'm at 50% of what Alan suggests that they'll be in a mere 7 years. And I can tell you, having been in the industry 42 years, 7 years is like tomorrow. So there's a lot going on here. But let's, one of the questions that has come up recently is what drives frozen prices? Why is the price seemingly stagnated? I'll look at that. Processed production report and forecast. Is the U.S. cold storage report relevant? That seems to be a burning question in many growers today. We'll look at exports of frozen, import of fresh, and has the frozen blueberry demand in the U.S. and Canada stalled? And then I'll take a look, my personal opinion of looking forward. I would just say, to start off, my perspective is U.S. and Canada as a single unit. We have a free border. I do the trade across the borders essentially free. There's a couple of phytosanitary issues in the east on some fresh fruit going into Canada, but for all practical purposes, there is no border up here in 2 or 3 miles north of us. So this is my forecast. This is my history and forecast for low bush. And I'd also say, looking at the frozen category, low bush has attempted to segment themselves from high bush, or low bush wild from blueberries. In reality, they've had some success, but essentially the marketplace sees a frozen blueberry as a frozen blueberry. And frankly, when prices in the last few years on low bush have gotten a dime to 15 cents below us, we've seen quite a bit of trade-off going back into the wild from the high bush. The other comment I would make on that regarding blueberry frozen is a blueberry frozen is that in the poly bag segment, 5 years ago, none of the major poly baggers had a wild skew. Today, they all have a wild skew, be it Sunrise or be it Townsend or be it Dole, or of course Wyman, which is that label is the label that's showing the greatest growth. And so the wild blueberry clearly is becoming very much in the polybag retail category as a competitor, or as I would suggest, we've got to develop a blueberry market because consumers really think more of blueberries as blueberries. But going back, you see here and I look at this, but you see the big year here, 400 million pounds, tremendous crop. They've got a lot of new acreage coming on. This 271 is actually a number that was reduced due to horticultural practices. Most of the wild growers reduced their bees in the field that year in 2017 due to the huge crop in 2016. And in 2018, that was not a result of horticulture, but that was a result of a major freeze in Nova Scotia. Although the number began back in September at 180, it's now at 205. And I have just taken and said, okay, can they go back to 400 million? Yes, I believe they could, but there's been a lot of exits. Small growers have gotten out. Prices paid to growers in 2017 across almost all areas, Eastern Canada as well as Maine, were as low as 17 cents a pound to the grower, harvested in a lug, to the highest prices that reported about 28 cents a pound. And at those numbers, there's been a lot of abandonment of fields. And you're going to see, I think there's a marginal acreage is definitely going to go out in the low bush business. Here's a high bush report from the past 2005 to 2018. 386 we got to, we were on the curve. I went back and looked at my numbers, and we were certainly heading for a billion pounds of process in 2027. I've reduced that down to, well, a billion pounds total, but I reduced it down to right now 450. But this was a Georgia, which Alan mentioned, took a real slam. And then this year we ended up at 308, primarily driven by the increase here in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. Michigan was short. Georgia come back a bit, but certainly not anywhere as close to the number they had in 2016. But here's a slide combines the two, looking at the two together. And here we see that for the 7 years, I just took from 2012 to 2018, and probably you could challenge me to take from 2014, but there's a 605 million pound average for those years. And in the frozen business, unlike the fresh business, guess what? We don't have to sell it tomorrow. It's in the cold storage. It's frozen. It'll keep another 2 months. It'll keep another year. It'll keep another 2 years. And so we tend to see that stabilize, and you'll see how that looks going forward. But I'm forecasting right now for 2027 about 800 million pounds in the U.S. and Canada. And if Alan's numbers are correct, that number is low. I just put this across here to kind of give you an indication of where prices were from 2000, and actually the prices had a lot of variation. We got as high as $2. This is high bush price now. We went down to in the 70s. We went back to $1.50. But since 2013, this price is really what I call stagnated. I would say this, and it does not show on here, is wild actually trended in 2016, 17, and actually going into the beginning of the 18 harvest. They were selling their fruit in the mid-70s FOB Eastern Canada and Maine. So they were essentially 20 cents as a general rule below our price here in the high bush industry. The other thing so let's just take a look and move on to the next slide. So what does cold storage holdings represent? We've had lots of, there was a couple of years ago, folks were saying, well, John, the cold storage we had a lot of juice stock this year. It's got to be, it's got to be 50% juice stock. Well, I don't really believe that. But it's only public cold storages. It's not a mandatory report. So it's those that choose to report. And those that choose to report is very stable. Matter of fact, I talked to the gal that does this for the USDA. And if she, try to keep a conversation with her, if she has a cold storage report that starts reporting that has not, she'll let me know. I've got a new cold storage report. The company is now reporting. So that's going to jar the numbers a little bit sometimes, but it's very, very stable as to who reports and who doesn't report. Then it's all frozen blueberries. It's wild high bush. It's imported. If it's a blueberry, it's reported in the cold storage. It's all pack sizes, it's poly bags. So if you got a poly bagger that's moving inventory into a public cold storage, those are reported in this cold storage report. It's all grades. It's contracted. So the packers may have it contracted, that's still reported. And it could be even it's been sold and was transferred to the customer. That's still reported. And the bottom line of it is this is the total volume of blueberries that really is in some type of a storage facility that either that's available to be used someplace in the system. And it's all grades. So it does not represent those storages that do not choose to report, but I think the majority do. It does not represent private cold storages. Private cold storages dominate in the wild lowbush industry. That industry is very tightly held. There's 5 players that have 90% of the production, and they can store in private cold storages well over 100 million pounds. That's in private storages, even in Canada. There's an increasing number of high bush cold storages owned by packers. Just in my conversations, I talked to packers. I'm building a 3 million pound storage. I'm building a 5 million pound storage. Those storages are not reported. And of course, customer-owned cold storages, such as a Dole would own a lot of their own storages, for example, down in Atwater. Those would not be reported as a private cold storage. So on the private cold storages, there's no reliable information available. It's only hearsay. But I think it is important to us as we look at the marketplace and supply analysis. I try to keep conversations going with folks to kind of get a sense of what inventories are. And I think we have somewhat of a judgment, but it's really a wag. It's a wild ass guess, quite frankly. But I think it's better than nothing than to take that wag. Is it reliable? I guess I go back to the U.S. cold storage report, and folks want to say, well, it's not reliable. I've used this, collected this information now going back into the 90s. And basically what I do, I take the low point in May or June, and I compare it to the high point in August or September. And so from the amount that goes into the cold storage during the harvest period. And as you can see here in 2008, 400 million pounds went in. 2009, 400 million, and so forth. But then this number up above, this 28% is the percentage of the crop reported. I'm sorry, this is the number reported the crop. But the amount that went into cold storage is 28%. It got to a high of 31%. And so I would suggest that these numbers are within a range that say that when that I can go back now, I come back from a USA NABC meeting where they give them their crop reports. I'll look at the cold storage report, and I'll say, does it make sense? So frankly, I can look at the last report at the difference, and I'll put a number on it of 29%, divide it by that, and I'll say this is what the process number will probably be this year. And it's amazing how close that can come. So I would suggest from this data that there is a consistency and reliability. Why were these 2 years here with high productions at lower amounts? Because more went into private cold storages due to the high production. They had to find more storages to place it into. And so I think that again relates to the crop. Here's the highs and lows of the cold storage report going back to 2005. And I think that you go back, you saw that last, that low price that we had, and I wasn't able to get that graph down here. But the prior year cold storage report, which this is, let me just talk about this for a minute. This number here at 182 for 2008 was in August of 2008. This number of 81 is in May of 2009. So this number here is what affects your 2009 pricing mentality, what's available. So always think about this as the crop year. Beginning of the crop year cycle, end of the crop year cycle. Beginning of the crop year cycle, end of the crop year cycle. Remember on the 2009 crop, we had prices start to advance again. Why? The end of the 2010, the end of the crop year cycle from 2009, this is now May, June of 2010, began to drive that price up. And so we see that increasing. We got over here to 2012, and from this point on, we've had relatively stable pricing. As you can see, we've really pushed up that bottom cold storage number here, as high as 148. One of the questions that I was even asked this morning is, John, what will it take to have the cold storage number reflect that we're going to probably have a stronger market? Well, I'd suggest, I've got a forecast in here right now for 75. I think, frankly, that's probably high. I believe that based upon what I know today, that could go to as low as 60. We go back to the last time that we had a cold storage number that drove the price higher. It was this 51 million. I believe if we do get to 60, 65 million, that will support stronger prices. I'm not sure 75 million will support stronger prices, quite frankly. Based upon what we're hearing today, prices will be up a bit from where they've been. Just a comment on current pricing out of chilies being offered at $1.15, which is up from where, probably up 10, 15 cents. But it's not sold yet, it's only offers. So, but think about this, always as a cycle. And this number here will be the number in the summer of 2019 that really impacts the 2019 pricing. I talk about disappearance, and I use the word disappearance versus consumption because it disappears from the visibility in the supply chain. And it's basically in the frozen business, it's the carry in in May or June, plus the new production, plus the imports, less the exports, less the carry out. And so that's what we basically look at here. And we're going to look at the annual change, the frozen utilized, and then some offshore import export numbers as well. Here's the change from year to year. You go back to 2008, we added nearly 30 million pounds from 2007. And you look what's happened here. In 2011, we added 20 million. We had 25 million. In 13, we still added. 14, 15, we added, and we've continued to have this price stabilize. And I'd suggest to you the reason the price stabilized is because of cost. Everybody kept holding on, hoping they'd get better money. These big drops here is driven by the wild industry decided to cut their price and move their inventory out. And I'll go to the next slide, or one more slide. Here's the slide using that number here at utilization. Using the U.S. cold storage only, my disappearance numbers in 2014 crop to 2017 crop have a lot of variation in them. I frankly don't believe that's realistic. We don't see frozen prices or frozen consumption, frozen disappearance go from 466 to 710 in 3 years. This doesn't happen. So what does it look like? Well, here I put in some guesses of private cold storages. Here, I believe in the wild industry, 140 million went into private cold storage out of that 400 million pound crop. And they began shipping it out. They weren't going to hold it. And so this year they've taken it out. Well, if you take these numbers and add it into the difference, now it levels out and you start looking at we're selling or consuming, disappearing about 580 to 570, someplace in the upper 500 million pounds per year. Frankly, this is far more reasonable, and I believe it's frankly quite accurate. And that's, again, the pricing is stabilized. There's been ample product, and demand hasn't been driving the price forward. On offshore exports are down here, and you'll see that they have been increasing. We'll look at an export slide specifically in just a moment. So then I go to this one. This is why I would suggest during this period of demand growth, when you really had demand growing, was from 2006 to 2013. You really saw from 290 million pounds to 460 million pounds. You had ample product going into here, but the market kind of at 500 million, 600 million, it really found its equilibrium, and that's where it's at. I was chatting with someone earlier today, and they talked about in a couple other crops that they just find a certain tonnage, and boy, the market kind of stays right there. And I would suggest we may be starting to see a little bit of that in the blueberry business as well. What of exports and imports? Well, here's these are combined U.S. and Canada. These are offshore. Again, I don't consider this border there, so I only look what goes across the Pacific or the Atlantic. or down to the South America. There's a little bit there, not very much. It's a few containers. So you go back to, this is the low bush exports. In 2011-12, hit some nice big numbers, and then it waned a bit. And then the last 2 years, high numbers. We're predicting a high number again this year. Matter of fact, that number is a calendar year number. I'm fairly certain they'll achieve that. But remember, they did this in the mid-70s, FOB Eastern Canada and Maine. These numbers were not at $1 a pound. They weren't at 90 cents a pound. They weren't at 80 cents a pound. They were actually putting product into Europe at less than 80 cents US dollars delivered to Europe to move these numbers up. Canadian wild exports are going about 60% to Europe and the balance to Asia. The the high bush exports have been primarily to Asia, and you can see that we had a little increase here, but they've been pretty flat: 34, 33, 28, and 28. I'm saying 25 this year. No particular reason for that, but basically flat. Then here's the imports. The imports are primarily from South America. This was the price year went up, and Chile was just starting to do a lot more frozen due to the fresh production was increasing. They shipped 46 million pounds essentially to the U.S. Most of the exports, like I say, come to the U.S. Argentina's bringing some in now, some from Peru. But you get over into, these were primarily over here, these years here, primarily conventional. Beginning in 2014 and 15, these imports have become about 75% organic, and they're coming out of Chile. So even of this 35 million, what's coming into the country is not conventional fruit. The conventional fruit coming into the country is very small. A good share of this is 20 million, 25 million of this is organic fruit. Frozen exports by high bush and low bush. Again, just to show the evidence of, here's the red is the low bush exports offshore, and the blue is the high bush. The guys in the frozen and the wild have they've really pushed their exports. They have a huge market in Europe. They're also now in China, Asia. They're very small in Japan. High bush has really kept their much more of an element in Japan than what the low bush has. Exports as percent of annual production. Alicia mentioned 11%, and that's what I'm showing, 10, 11%. Wild went as high as 43, 58% we're forecasting this year. And I think if that crop stays high, that they'll continue to do that. But I don't think that'll happen. They can't afford to do business at the 70-cent area. Remember, I said to you that 70-cent price returned in 2016 between 17 and 28 cents to the field in the lug harvested. So that's a price that it can't be lived with. Imports of fresh. I've had the question, this is one of the questions that Alan asked me, I think back at USHBC meeting. Is that impacting the consumption of frozen? Well, I would suggest it probably is, because it is an alternative product. It is an alternative form, and of course, in the eyes of much of the media, the food media, in the eyes of many consumers, fresh is best. And so here's the U.S.-Canadian production of fresh, and you can see it's been relatively flat. But look at the imports. They've been growing 202, 296. They have been flat the last 3 years, and this forecast is 294 for this calendar year. So you can see that that's increasing. So there's 600 million, 700 million pounds of fresh consumed, but again, we don't see a lot of increase there at this time as far as total numbers. Then I just took and put this together as an annual blueberry disappearance in the U.S. and Canada, fresh, frozen, high bush and low bush. And again, you can see when you combine it all together, here's your Canadian, U.S. Canadian of fresh production. Here's your fresh imports. You can see the line going there from about 500 million to 600 to 700 million. Then you see on top of it, the frozen, and the frozen's been very stable for disappearance, I would suggest, in the last 5 years due to that storage factor. We've been working storage up, working it down. And so we're not seeing, so I would suggest to you that our disappearance in the U.S. and Canada of all blueberries, other than is really stabilized here in the last 4 years, 5 years. I pulled this slide, and if you'd like to see this slide, it's a live slide. It's a live report. It's off the internationalblueberry.org slide. You just type. You don't need no password. You can just type into the for the IBO website, and this is it's up to date. This is the last 52 weeks as of a week ago. And the reason I put this black line across here, this is 10 million pounds a year, or I'm sorry, 10 million pounds a week. There is, most people that are targeting this marketplace feel that they can come to the U.S. with 10 million pounds each week and make money. And frankly, some can do it at less than that. They're talking to me that they need to have $3 a pound. But for example, Peru has cost significantly less than $3 a pound. They can come here for less than that number out of Peru. But I think if you just look at all the gaps in here, there's going to be a lot of blueberries, and that's where the target is right now, is to continue to grow in these white areas underneath that black line. And where will that black line move to in 2 years or 3 years? Will it move to 14 million? Will it move to 12 million? I'm not sure what will happen there. But I would tell you that if they're able to grow for these markets, that's going to put more fresh into this market, which I think again diminishes the potential for frozen sales as far as particularly polybag, maybe not ingredient, but there's also a byproduct that comes from these. There will be product that goes to the freezer. Already out of Peru, there's a couple million pounds a year, probably up to 5 going to the freezers in Peru right now, just due to the fresh market just can't absorb it all at their certain time periods. So we're already seeing that byproduct take place out of these new growing areas. So why stagnant frozen prices? Well, I think we had a frozen rapid growth rate of 12.5% for the 5 years from 2012 to 16. The supply level, the storage level, the supply offered. There's those low bush prices I mentioned. Low bush frozen prices are in the 70s. Fresh growth will continue adding supply as a preferred alternative for the homeowner, for the consumer. Fresh pack will continue to grow. I think growth will be limited by declining margins, and that's not what you want to hear in this room. You're growers, but I believe we're going to see the increased cost of production, increased inputs, and can we drive productivity fast enough to keep our average cost per pound low? Alan mentioned food safety. I can tell you, I've been in the industry 42 years, and I'm astounded at what we're spending on food safety today. Absolutely astounded. And I think that what you see taking place with romaine lettuce, be very careful. That could be a fruit crop sooner rather than later. I'm astounded. That's all I can say about food safety. I think May 2019 will be the lowest cold storage stock since 2011. I do think we should see stronger prices into the 2019 harvest. I don't think we'll see $1.50. I frankly think if we got to $1.25, that would be a gift. But I don't think it'll last. I think if we get up that kind of price 1 year, I believe that the wild industry can go back, if they can get back to $1 a pound, they'll go back to 300 to 350 million pounds a year like that, because they've got new areas opened up in New Brunswick, much more productive, and I think that can really increase. The wild is going to keep a lid, as well as the whole deal is going to keep a lid on frozen prices, bottom line, whether it's wild or whether it's high bush, because of the growth that's coming. Western Hemisphere production focus, I mentioned that, to fill the valleys of supply. Frozen pack will increase, margins will narrow. There will be exit of high cost production. We're starting to hear a little bit of that right now. Blueberry demand, I believe, will continue to grow around the world, but production will as well. And I guess my comment is, tighten your belt, the ride may be turbulent. I guess I would just say this, I think we often forget that it's always share a stomach and share disposable income spent for groceries. And when we take a pound of fruit away from somebody else, or when we take a pound more, we've taken a pound of fruit from somebody else typically. So it's how do we get that share of stomach and the share of the dollar? Thank you for your time. I'd be happy to take questions. thanks to NatureRipe, they pay for some. We have to buy some of this data. NatureRipe's paying for this data that we buy. Obviously, the cold storage reports I do not have to pay for, but I also want to thank any of those many colleagues in the industry who I maintain conversations with to help me give you a perspective on this. Thank you.
We'll take a 10-minute break before the next session started at 9:45. Thanks, Alan.